Iraq is often called the land between two rivers, home to the Tigris and Euphrates, and the heart of ancient Mesopotamia. Thousands of years ago, it was the birthplace of writing, law, agriculture, and urban civilization. It witnessed the rise and fall of empires: Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians. Its soil carried the echoes of Hammurabi's code and the libraries of Nineveh. Yet, by the dawn of the 21st century, this land of civilization had become a battlefield. The Iraq War began on March 20, 2003, when a U.S.-led coalition invaded the country. Officially, the war was launched to disarm Iraq of weapons of mass destruction, end Saddam Hussein's rule, and liberate its people. But the deeper reasons were far more complex: an aftermath of the 9/11 attacks, questions of oil and geopolitics, and a belief that Iraq could become a model democracy in the Middle East. For the people of Iraq, the invasion wasn't a theory. It was a thunderstorm of fire and steel. Cities shook under bombing raids. The infrastructure crumbled. Electricity failed, hospitals overflowed, and entire families were displaced. Amid the noise of jets and tanks, daily life unraveled. In the city of Mosul, 19-year-old Karim Al-Saadi had been studying civil engineering. He dreamed of designing bridges to connect people, to build instead of destroy. His father was a school principal, and his mother taught literature. They were part of a hopeful middle class. But when the first airstrikes hit, books and dreams were replaced by survival. The university shut down. Grocery stores emptied. Streets once full of laughter turned quiet and tense. Thousands of miles away in California, 21-year-old Daniel Reyes prepared for deployment. A Marine Corps corporal, Daniel had joined after the September 11th attacks. Raised in a patriotic family, he believed in service, in justice, and in the idea that freedom was worth fighting for. When told he would be part of the invasion force, he packed his gear with pride, unaware of what lay ahead. The first months of the war moved quickly. Baghdad fell. Saddam disappeared. Statues toppled. The world watched with awe and dread. But the real war was just beginning. Insurgency, sectarian strife, civilian casualties. Trust gave way to fear. Iraq's problems were not solved by regime change. They were multiplied. Karim's world became a maze of checkpoints, curfews, and news of bombings. His neighbors vanished. His cousin was arrested without explanation. His mother stopped teaching. His father's school was shut down. Dreams of a future were slowly replaced by the instinct to endure. Daniel, like many Marines, entered Iraq expecting combat and found chaos instead. His unit was sent to patrol areas filled with mistrust. Children smiled in the morning and disappeared by nightfall. Roads were littered with IEDs. Every building was a potential trap. The moral lines blurred. Was this liberation? Was this security? And so, two young men, Karim and Daniel, moved through this landscape. One trying to hold on to his home, the other trying to carry out a mission. Their stories, unknown to each other, were threads in the greater tapestry of a war that reshaped nations. This is their story, of war, survival, humanity, and the enduring will to rise from the ruins. Two lives that collided amid the chaos, each changed forever by the war. March 19, 2003. The skies above Baghdad pulsed with ominous light. Explosions thudded in the distance like war drums as the United States launched its shock and awe campaign, an orchestrated blitz of missile strikes designed to cripple Iraq's defenses and morale. The world watched in disbelief. The war had begun. In Mosul, 19-year-old Karim Al-Saadi was poring over his civil engineering textbook, immersed in dreams of rebuilding his country's crumbling infrastructure. A sharp roar overhead broke his concentration. Within minutes, his entire neighborhood seemed to tremble. Bombs thundered in the distance. His father, a composed school principal, grabbed a flashlight and calmly ordered the family into their basement. Karim's mother clutched a prayer book. Their little sister wept silently. They waited in the darkness, breath held, as Iraq changed above their heads. The power went out that night. And the next. News arrived by word of mouth. Baghdad was under siege. Basra had gone dark. U.S. forces were advancing fast. Karim stepped outside one morning to find black smoke on the horizon and shattered glass in the street. A bakery on the next block had collapsed. What little food they had, they shared with neighbors. Families took turns watching from rooftops to see if soldiers or bombs were approaching. Meanwhile, across the world in California, 21-year-old Corporal Daniel Reyes finished his last training drills at Camp Pendleton. His boots were polished, his rifle oiled, his backpack heavy with rations and resolve. Daniel had joined the Marine Corps 2 years earlier, inspired by the September 11th attacks and a family legacy of military service. His father had fought in Vietnam, his grandfather in Korea. Now it was his turn. Daniel's impression of Iraq was shaped by briefings, documentaries, and conversations in the barracks. He'd been told it was a land of deserts and dictators, a place crying out for freedom. Their mission was to remove Saddam Hussein and restore order. Daniel believed deeply in that cause. His squad leader told them they were making history. The first wave of Marines crossed into Iraq from Kuwait under cover of darkness. The desert wind kicked up sandstorms, clouding vision and choking their lungs. Daniel's Humvee rattled across cracked highways, past oil fields ablaze with fire. The night sky shimmered orange. Resistance was sparse at first. Iraqi army units surrendered or fled. But soon, firefights erupted in narrow streets. Improvised explosive devices, IEDs, began to appear under overpasses and in garbage piles. Tensions flared. Civilians were caught in the crossfire. In Mosul, Karim's university was shuttered indefinitely. His textbooks gathered dust. He helped his father reinforce their windows with plywood and walked hours to find clean water. Friends disappeared. Some joined militias, driven by anger or desperation. Karim stayed home, sketching bridges in the margins of his notebook, dreaming of when peace might return. The bombing of Baghdad's Republican Palace symbolized the regime's collapse. Crowds pulled down statues of Saddam. Journalists filmed cheering Iraqis. But behind the headlines, fear festered. Law enforcement dissolved overnight. Looting broke out. Prisons were emptied. Roads filled with checkpoints, and every armed group claimed to be liberators. Daniel's unit moved north to secure key roads between Ramadi and Fallujah. They manned checkpoints, conducted night patrols, and searched homes. At first, people waved. Children shouted, "Mr. Chocolate," and women brought bread. But the smiles faded. One day, a boy handed Daniel a note, "Leave or die." Daniel's letters home shifted in tone. He no longer wrote about victory, but about confusion. Who were the enemy? Why were schools still closed? Why were so many angry? Karim, too, found his beliefs shifting. He had disliked Saddam, but never welcomed war. He questioned everything. What had the Americans truly come for? Freedom? Oil? Revenge? He did not know. But every explosion, every checkpoint, every funeral chipped away at trust. The spark wasn't a single event. It was the slow ignition of a fire that would burn for years. It was in the roar of jets over Karim's house. In Daniel's first footsteps on foreign soil. In the shared silence between two young men on opposite sides of a battlefield they did not choose. This was only the beginning. Raised in a military family, he had enlisted after the 9/11 attacks. To him, Iraq was a land of danger and duty, a place where America would right a wrong and bring democracy. He shipped out with the 1st Marine Division, unaware that his mission would be anything but clear-cut. Baghdad fell in April 2003. Saddam's statue was pulled down in a public square, and the city teetered between celebration and collapse. For many Iraqis, the dictator's fall was a long-awaited relief, but what followed was a descent into uncertainty. Without functioning government institutions, law enforcement, or basic services, the country began to unravel. Looting swept across Baghdad. Government buildings were stripped bare, museums ransacked, and hospitals left in chaos. American troops, caught between combat operations and sudden responsibility for civil order, were unprepared for the vacuum. For Iraqis like Karim, the promise of liberation was quickly clouded by disorder. In Mosul, Karim's university officially closed. The professors stopped showing up. His father's school, once a haven of education and stability, was padlocked. With no clear path forward, Karim worked with his older brother to make ends meet. They patched roofs, carried jugs of clean water through bomb-damaged streets, and passed whispered updates about missing friends and relatives. Life became a rhythm of uncertainty, curfews at dusk, sudden raids, and funerals. Karim watched the U.S. tanks roll through the city. He had no fondness for Saddam, whose regime had imprisoned a cousin for speaking out. But seeing foreign soldiers man checkpoints and storm homes struck a different nerve. Iraqis wanted freedom, but not like this. Trust, once fragile, now felt impossible. Meanwhile, Daniel's unit had moved from southern Iraq toward the rest of Anbar province. Their mission shifted from invasion to occupation. In theory, they were peacekeepers now. They distributed food, secured roads, and tried to foster goodwill. In reality, they were targets. IEDs, improvised explosive devices, became a near-daily threat. Buried under roads, hidden in dead animals or roadside trash, They took out convoys without warning. One morning, a sergeant from Daniel's squad lost both legs when their Humvee hit a pressure plate. The horror etched itself into Daniel's mind. He began riding with his seatbelt loose, better to be thrown than trapped. Daniel also saw children wave as his convoy passed. He handed out candy, even soccer balls. But he could feel the shift. As days turned to weeks, the smiles turned to cold stares. Informants became harder to trust. Militias grew bold. At night, gunfire echoed across neighborhoods. Karim heard the same gunfire. He counted the seconds between bursts and prayed it wasn't near his family's house. At dawn, he'd walk the neighborhood, check for new bullet holes or bloodstains. His mother no longer allowed his younger sister to go outside. His father spoke less. People avoided eye contact. No one knew who supported whom, Sunni, Shia, American insurgent. Daniel, like many in uniform, grew weary. They built schools, only for them to be burned down. They protected polling places, only to see low turnout after bomb threats. Morale dipped. The line between friend and foe blurred further with each mission. One day, Daniel's squad raided a suspected bombmaker's home. They found nothing, just a terrified family and a crying infant. Daniel stared at the child and thought of his baby niece back home. That night, he wrote to his sister but didn't mention the raid. Karim, meanwhile, tried to remain neutral. But neutrality became dangerous. Local militias demanded loyalty. Refusal led to threats. People he once played soccer with now wore masks and carried rifles. One friend joined a militia after his father was killed in a nighttime raid. Karim pleaded with him to stay out of violence. "What choice do we have?" his friend asked. By the end of 2003, the hope that accompanied the regime's fall had almost vanished. It was replaced by power outages, fear, and a growing insurgency. Foreign troops were no longer seen as liberators, and even well-meaning reconstruction efforts were viewed with suspicion. Daniel and Karim lived worlds apart, yet their experiences began to mirror each other. Both tried to make sense of their surroundings. Both endured long nights of silence. Both lost pieces of themselves to the occupation. The fighting was far from over, but the wounds had already begun to deepen. April 2004. Fallujah, once a relatively quiet city along the Euphrates, was now the epicenter of rage and resistance. When news broke that 4 American contractors had been ambushed, killed, and their charred bodies hung from a bridge, the U.S. military launched a swift and punishing response. The city was declared enemy territory, and Operation Vigilant Resolve was unleashed. Daniel Reyes, now a seasoned corporal, was ordered to join the thousands of Marines preparing for the assault. He had faced IEDs and sniper fire before, but Fallujah was different. From the moment they entered the city, everything changed. The air smelled of smoke and sewage. Bullet holes pockmarked every wall. As his unit advanced street by street, door by door, the rules of engagement blurred. The resistance was fierce. Insurgents had prepared, fortifying homes, tunneling escape routes, and setting traps. Snipers positioned in minarets picked off soldiers at intersections. Daniel's squad lost their sergeant on the first day. A bullet took him through the neck as he gave orders beside an alleyway. Every building was a potential ambush. Marines smashed through walls instead of using doors. RPGs screamed from rooftops. Machine guns rattled like jackhammers. The city became a maze of fire and death. Some homes were abandoned. Others held terrified civilians hiding in bathtubs. Daniel's closest friends, Hernandez and Patel, were killed during a dawn patrol. An RPG struck their Humvee, flipping it into a crumbling wall. Daniel crawled from the wreckage with ringing ears and blood-soaked sleeves. He would never forget the silence after the blast, or the image of Hernandez's hand reaching for help that would never come. For Karim, Fallujah's battle was felt through the flood of wounded arriving at a makeshift clinic in a village nearby. He had no formal medical training, but he helped wrap burns, carry stretchers, and comfort survivors. One boy arrived with his face blistered from fire. Karim held his hand as he cried, "Is God angry with us?" Karim had no answer. The stories from Fallujah sickened him. Entire blocks leveled. Families buried beneath rubble. Ambulances turned away by gunfire. Some fighters were foreigners, others just local men pushed to the edge. And in the middle, always, invisible, forgotten civilians like Karim's neighbors, his cousins, his childhood friends. The siege lasted weeks. Fallujah bled. Bodies lay in the streets. Homes were reduced to ash. U.S. troops eventually pulled back, leaving a fractured city and a wave of bitterness in their wake. The mission, from a military standpoint, was called a success. But Daniel knew better. Back at the base, he sat on a cot, staring at his blood-streaked boots. His commanding officer spoke of honor and courage, but Daniel felt hollow. He'd seen children orphaned, women scream, and men broken. He'd seen his friends die. Was this justice? Was this the democracy they were promised to deliver? Karim helped bury the dead. He carried wood for coffins, sat with grieving mothers, and wiped tears from his sister's face when she asked if the war would reach them too. He began to write in a journal, short stories, poems, anything to escape the rage building inside him. Fallujah became a turning point. For Daniel, it was where belief in his mission began to crack. For Karim, it was where hope that the occupation might end peacefully finally died. The scars would remain long after the guns went silent. By 2005, the initial optimism of reconstruction had eroded into widespread disillusionment. The Iraqis had been promised democracy, safety, and opportunity. What they received was chaos. The transitional government was plagued by corruption. Ministries failed to deliver basic services. Power outages were common. Sewage overflowed in the streets. And fear remained the defining force of daily life. In the rural outskirts of Mosul, Karim Al-Saadi tried to hold on to purpose. With his university shuttered again due to protests and violence, he joined a youth council sponsored by a United Nations agency. Their aim was simple: to rebuild infrastructure, clean water projects, electricity repair, and youth engagement programs. But nothing was simple in post-invasion Iraq. Militias ruled neighborhoods with their own laws. Every project required negotiations, bribes, and sometimes protection fees. One day, while overseeing the installation of a water filtration unit, Karim was warned by a masked man to stop working with outsiders. The next week, a co-volunteer named Sammy was taken from his home at night. His body was found 2 days later, dumped in a drainage canal. Karim stopped attending meetings for a time. His mother begged him to stay home. His father spoke of fleeing the country altogether. But Karim refused to give in to fear. He resumed work more cautiously. Every handshake could be a threat, every promise an illusion. Meanwhile, Daniel Reyes was stationed near Baghdad. His unit's mission was to support training efforts for Iraqi security forces. In theory, they were empowering Iraqis to manage their own country. But in practice, many of the recruits were untrained, unmotivated, or infiltrated by insurgents. One day, a training exercise turned deadly when a newly enrolled recruit opened fire, killing 2 American soldiers. Daniel began writing longer letters home, unfiltered ones he never sent. He wrote of sleepless nights, broken equipment, and local interpreters who vanished. He wrote of the look in Iraqi children's eyes, wary, unreadable. He wrote of the guilt he felt searching homes, interrogating fathers, and always wondering if they had made it worse. In late 2005, elections were held. Purple fingers marked those who voted. Hope bloomed briefly. But after the polls closed, sectarian violence exploded. Sunni and Shia militias attacked each other's mosques, homes, and markets. Neighborhoods became battle zones. Trust collapsed completely. Karim's cousin, a shopkeeper in Baghdad, was shot outside his store. The family received a note saying, "Wrong sect. Wrong street." Karim wrote poetry at night, his only escape. He scribbled lines about bridges, about sandstorms, about young boys with too many funerals. He dreamed of publishing them someday. He stopped watching the news. It only brought despair. Daniel, too, was unraveling. His best friend, Corporal Jenkins, stepped on an IED during a patrol. Daniel found him lying in the dust, legs mangled, whispering prayers. Jenkins died before the medevac arrived. That night, Daniel punched a wall in his barracks. His knuckles bled for hours. The following week, Daniel was sent on leave for rest and recovery. He flew back to California, but nothing felt like home. The food tasted bland. Music sounded hollow. He couldn't explain to his mother why he sat silently at dinner, or why fireworks on New Year's made him flinch. Both Karim and Daniel had entered the war with hopes, one for rebuilding, the other for protecting. But by 2006, all that remained were broken promises. The narrative of liberation had splintered into tales of loss and survival. And yet, despite everything, both men continued to endure. Not because they believed in the mission anymore, but because they had to. Because giving up would mean surrendering what little they had left. Their paths remained separate, but their pain ran parallel. And soon, fate would bring them closer than either could imagine. He tried to bring clean water to his neighborhood, but local militias demanded bribes. One night, his friend Sammy was taken by masked men. He was found days later in a ditch. In 2006, the region around Ramadi was one of the deadliest in Iraq. Insurgents controlled entire neighborhoods. U.S. convoys faced attacks almost daily. It was in this dangerous terrain that fate would bring two lives together. Daniel's platoon had been assigned a routine supply escort through a stretch of highway just outside Ramadi. They had made the trip before, tense but manageable. That morning, the sun was already high, the heat stifling, the air buzzing with unseen menace. The lead vehicle hit an IED buried beneath a patch of road. The explosion tore through the undercarriage, sending the Humvee into the air. Flames followed. Screams echoed. The convoy came to a halt, trapped in a kill zone. Gunfire erupted from rooftops. Insurgents had been waiting. The remaining vehicles tried to maneuver, but chaos spread quickly. Daniel was thrown from his seat when his truck swerved and collided with a low wall. Shrapnel sliced through his thigh and shoulder. Dazed, ears ringing, he crawled out, dragging himself away from the wreckage. He found temporary shelter in the courtyard of an abandoned house, heart pounding. He knew he couldn't make it far. Blood soaked through his uniform. The gunfire continued in the distance, growing faint. He passed in and out of consciousness. Alone. Dying, perhaps. He thought of home. Of his sister. Of the time his father taught him how to fish. The edges of his world blurred. Karim had been riding his bicycle through the outskirts, delivering supplies to a nearby community clinic. He had taken the side roads to avoid military checkpoints, as he usually did. When he heard the explosion, he stopped. His first instinct was to turn back, but curiosity and something deeper made him move closer. As he rounded a corner, he spotted the American soldier bleeding on the ground. For a moment, Karim froze. The uniform. The blood. The war. Every reason to run screamed in his mind. But something else, perhaps the same force that made him study bridges instead of bombs, held him there. Slowly he approached. The soldier stirred, lifted his hand. Their eyes met. Karim knelt beside him. Daniel muttered words he couldn't understand. Karim placed a finger over his lips, signaling for silence. He wrapped a strip of cloth around the soldier's leg to slow the bleeding. Then, supporting the wounded man as best he could, he dragged him inside an old toolshed behind the house. For 2 days Karim tended to Daniel. He brought him water and bread, cleaned his wounds with boiled herbs and strips of linen. They did not speak the same language, but words weren't needed. Karim offered calm and care. Daniel offered trust and gratitude. The pain was immense, but so was the bond forming between them. On the second night, Daniel pointed weakly to his chest, saying, "Daniel." Karim nodded, touched his own chest, and said, "Karim." That night, they listened to the distant sound of helicopters. Karim knew the Americans would return, searching for survivors. At dawn, he walked miles through side streets and alleys until he found a military patrol. Without identifying himself, he described the wounded soldier's location in broken Arabic and gestures. Then he turned and walked away. Hours later, a U.S. medic team found Daniel, unconscious but alive. He was evacuated and flown to a field hospital. As he lay recovering, he asked about the man who saved him. No one knew. No one could explain. Daniel never saw Karim again. But the image of a young man with steady eyes and gentle hands remained burned into his memory. In a war defined by hatred and destruction, this moment of mercy defied everything. It complicated everything. It humanized the enemy. It reminded him of what they were fighting for, or maybe what they had forgotten along the way. For Karim, the encounter was just as profound. He never told anyone, not his parents, not the men at the clinic. It wasn't safe to admit helping an American soldier. But in his journal, he wrote a poem titled The Stranger. In it, he described the look in Daniel's eyes, the silence of shared pain, and the fleeting nature of peace. Years later, long after the war had ended for both of them, that chance encounter would resurface. But for now it lived only in memory, buried beneath the dust of Ramadi, hidden in the folds of two hearts scarred by war, but still beating with hope.